Anyone has joined. My name is Josephine Lee. I'm an attorney at the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, and I specialize in student loan law and higher education financing. And I'm here to just share a bit about how to manage your student loans, how to navigate kind of the higher ed financing system, and hopefully to leave some time at the end for questions that you may have. I'll just go ahead and get started. So today we're just going to start by going over the different options for paying for college, from grants to fee waivers and loans, and then talking about how to manage your student loans. I imagine that's something that's really important to people, and that's the bulk of what I'll be discussing today. And so there are various ways that we can pay for college. This is really going to be geared towards California students. So in California, we have something called the Community College Promise Grant, which is a really great source of funding for folks who want to go to one of our many California community colleges. It's need-based, and you do have to complete a FAFSA to determine if you're eligible. But if you are, then the grant will cover your tuition at any California community college. It doesn't cover books and other kind of incidental costs, but still that can be really helpful for folks who are looking to get some training and explore their options through the community colleges. There are also other types of grants. So unlike loans, grants typically do not need to be paid back, but they are determined by eligibility. So the state version is called a Cal Grant, and the federal version is called a Pell Grant. And again, for all of these, you usually have to complete a FAFSA, which is a free application for federal student aid to determine if you're eligible and how much you can get through these different grants. And then finally, there are scholarships as well. I highly recommend looking into scholarships. You usually have to apply, submit some kind of application. Rarely do scholarships have fees, application fees or anything like that. So typically it's money that's available if you apply. But for most folks, they may need to look to student loans to finance their higher education. In the US, most of our student loans are federal student loans, meaning they're coming from the federal government. Over 90% are federal student loans. Right now, we're kind of in a student loan crisis. If people have been reading the news or following politics, basically, we are at over 1.5 trillion in outstanding federal student loans, which is huge. I think it's 44 million Americans who have federal student debt. A smaller percentage of the outstanding student loans is private loans, meaning that it's coming from a bank, and they usually have different types of contracts and terms. But for most people, they're going to be dealing with their federal student loans. So the main thing to start is to create what's called a federal student aid ID. If you've applied for federal student aid after 2015, you probably already created this FSA ID. If you haven't and went to school maybe before 2015, you can create one, and it's helpful because this is going to be your login to access information about your federal student loans. So the link is here, fsaid.ed.gov, and you're going to create your ID through that website. With that ID, you can access what's called your National Student Loan Data System Report, or NSLDS. You're going to go to nslds.ed.gov, and you'll see this kind of website here that I've included. You can click on Financial Aid Review, and it'll take you to log in with your federal student aid ID. And so if you haven't created one, you can do it through this way as well. But this is helpful. You're going to log in with your username and password, and you can log into your NSLDS. And this is similar to what you might see. It's going to give you a summary of your loans and your grants. This is helpful because for a lot of people, and I work with a lot of student loan clients, they don't really know what type of loans they have. They know they have some kind of financial aid, but that term is really broad. They don't know what type, if it's grants or if it's loans, if it's federal loans or private student loans. So that's why I always recommend this is just helpful for you to know as a student and as a borrower what is outstanding for you, how many loans you have, kind of what does this look like. This is a broad picture. I compare it to like a credit report for your student loans. So I log in and I'll see a summary of my loans here. From this initial loan summary page, I can get a good amount of information. I can see the total amount of my outstanding principal and my interest. I also can see how many loans that I have. This person has 10 loans. I can see how much was dispersed, when the loans went out, and kind of the interest that accrued on each of the loans. This, however, is my loan summary page. If you click on these numbers next to each of the loans, it's a hyperlink to a more detailed loan page that'll give you more information. So, for example, it'll look something like this, where you're going to get that loan information and you're going to see what school it went to. This one's not populated, but if you say I went to Irvine Valley College, then it would show here the loans that I obtained to attend, and then it'll include the school right there. This loan detail page also will give me a history of all of my loan statuses. So when my loan was originated, if I were ever in forbearance or if I fell into default, it'll all kind of be in this loan summary. And finally, it gives me my servicer. So with federal student loans, after 2010, all of them are dispersed directly from the Department of Education. And so when we have questions or when borrowers need someone to ask questions to, basically with their student loans, they're going to have to go to their servicer. The Department of Education contracts out with these companies to be the middleman and to be, basically they're supposed to assist borrowers with their federal student loans. Before, we had 4 major federal student loan servicers. It was Navient, Great Lakes, Fed Loan Servicing, and Nelnet. Now we have quite a few more, but it's helpful for you as a borrower, even if you're still in school and don't have any payments due yet, you can still look and see this information, because once payments are due, once you graduate, or if you stop attending, you're going to want to know ahead of time who's your servicer. You don't want to just take the person who first contacts you. You don't want to take their word that you have to make payments to them, because technically the servicer is the one that's collecting the payments. And so it is really important to be informed, and this website will give you that information. It's a government website, and so it'll have the most accurate information for you about your student loan servicer. And in here, it shows this person's servicer is the Utah State Board of Regents, and it gives you the address where you can contact them, the phone number, as well as their website. So with federal student loans, repayment starts 6 months after you graduate or you withdraw from your program. The good thing about federal student loans is that payments are not due while you are enrolled at least half-time in your school. Idea being, you're a student and that should be your first priority. And so for better or for worse, you don't have to worry about your federal loan payments until around 6 months after graduation. The bad news is that if you are graduating in May or June, which is when people typically graduate, that means your first payments are going to be due right around the holidays, so November, December. So it's good to prepare during that interim time. Look at your NSLDS report and figure out who your servicer is, and also to start looking at other repayment options. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But all All right. I think that might be the next few slides. So I graduated in May. I'm going to get my first payments 6 months later, are going to be due sometime in November. I've looked at my NSLDS report. I figured out who my servicer is. And then in November, or maybe prior to that, I get a letter from my servicer letting them know, hi, we're your servicer. Your payments are going to be due starting November. What payment amount is due? The default is the standard repayment plan. This is not going to be typically the most affordable repayment plan. It's just the default one that all borrowers who get started on repayment are put into. And what it is a 10-year fixed plan, meaning they look at your loan balance and say, okay, I'm just going to use someone's name. Okay, Sally, for you to complete paying off all of your loans in 10 years, you have to give us $60 a month. It doesn't look at how much Sally is earning. It doesn't look at her employment situation. All it does is it looks at her loan balance and breaks it down into equal payments for 10 years. However, for some people, that might not be the best option, especially if you have a pretty high loan balance. And so these are some other types of repayment plans. The first is income-driven repayment. And I'm going to go into this in much more detail because I strongly recommend looking into this option first and foremost, unless you're able to afford your standard repayment plan. Extended and graduated repayment, I'll just briefly touch on. Extended repayment, kind of like what it sounds like, it will extend the time period that you're paying your loan. So instead of 10 years, you're extending it to 15, 20 years. So by doing that, each payment is a little bit less because you're stretching out the time that you're paying it. Unfortunately, because of the way interest works, you're going to be paying more in the long run if you do it that way, meaning paying more overall. That's one option. The second or the third option is graduated repayment. What that means is it will, instead of a fixed monthly payment, it will start at a lower payment and then gradually increase over the 10-year period. It's supposed to follow your anticipated wage growth over time. Extended and graduated repayment are really not the best options, especially if you're perhaps thinking of doing public service loan forgiveness, because if you are in these plans, you will not be eligible for PSLF. And so honestly, the best options are going to be income-driven repayment. And what is IDR or income-driven repayment? The plans, they range from 20 to 25 years. And some people get shocked by that. They think, oh my gosh, I have to pay my student loans for that long? Yes, but at the same time, unlike other types of loans, there is no what's called statute of limitations on your federal student loans. It is a federal debt. And so the alternative is you pay until you pay off your loans, or if there's any balance, the government can literally come after you until the day you die. And so this gives somewhat of a, I guess, light at the end of the tunnel by limiting the range to 20 to 25 years. You pay according to your income, and I'll discuss what income counts. And if there's any balance that's left over, say I pay according to my income, but I'm still not able to pay off all of my loans at that 20-year mark, then whatever is left over at the end is forgiven. Currently, that forgiven debt is able to be taxed as income, but hopefully we can get the law changed before then. I don't know anyone who's reached the end of that time at this period, but it's just something to note. You can apply for income-driven online at studentloans.gov, and you use your federal student aid ID to log in and do that. Okay, so unlike standard repayment, which only looks at your loan balance, income-driven repayment looks at your income, but it's not all of your income that they look at. They look at a certain amount of your income. And so under the Department of Education calls it your discretionary income. And what that means is whatever you earn above 150% of the poverty level for your household size. So I have all of this definition, and I'm fine with you all sharing these slides and using it, but I really think the best way is to look at an example. And so here's an example from the federal poverty guidelines. They're established every year, and it's basically what the federal government has determined is the poverty level according to different household sizes. Unfortunately, there is no local like inflation or local adjustment. So this is for a lot of the people who live in Los Angeles or Southern California. These numbers, I mean, they're extremely low. But this is what we have when we're dealing with federal student loans. So Tanya, her AGI, or her adjusted gross income, that number you can find on your taxes. This is basically, though, whatever you earn before, whatever your taxable income is $30,000 a year. She's a household of one, and she has $40,000 in federal student loans. So we're going to do just a bit of math here. Under standard repayment, her payment would be $444 a month. Okay, so that's quite a big chunk of her monthly take-home pay, right? So for 10 years, she pays $444 a month, and that amount will pay off all of her loans in 10 years. Okay, that's one option for Tanya. But if she can't afford that, she's going to want to look into income-driven repayment. And so, let's see, income-driven repayment, we're going to first look at what is Tanya's discretionary income. Like I mentioned before, discretionary income is whatever you earn above 150% of the poverty level for your household size. So Tanya's a household of one, and she earns $30,000. So we're going to take the difference between $1,890, which is 150% of poverty level for a household of one, and her actual income, and we get $11,900. So that's the income that the Department of Education will look at. $11,910. But that's from that income, 10% of it is taken, and that's what the department's decided she can afford to pay every month for her student loans. So 10 to 15%. The older plan is 15% of your discretionary income. The newer plans are 10%. So the eligibility, of course, everyone would rather do 10% of their income rather than 15%, but eligibility just depends on your loans. For all the folks who are on this call, probably who are currently in school, you're going to most likely be eligible for the more favorable 10% plan because you have more recent loans. But just to give you a sense of how IBR or income driven is helpful, under IBR, her payments would drop down to $149 a month. Under pay or repay, which are the more recent plans, her payments would drop down to $99 a month. So as you can see, it makes a really big difference for Tanya, and it's helpful because she's going to be able to afford these payments, at least much more affordable than $444 a month. You can apply online, like I said, at studentloans.gov. There is a way that you can connect your IRS tax information directly so that the application can be processed quicker. Or if you prefer to submit a paper application, you can definitely do that, and you submit that to your servicer. So again, like I mentioned, with payments, with any kind of for payment plans, or later on if you want to request a forbearance or deferment, all of that will go to your servicer. And so that's why it's important to know ahead of time who your servicer is. The one requirement with income-driven repayment, however, is to recertify your income, because they need to make sure that they update your monthly payments. So say the annual recertification is every 12 months from when you entered into the program, not every January, or, it's every 12 months from when you entered into your program. So say I entered into my program in March 2019. Before March 2020, I have to let my servicer know what is my updated income. And so again, I can do all of that online at studentloans.gov, or I can send them information. I can send them the form with my updated, tax information or pay stubs. For some people, maybe they don't have taxable income. I have a lot of clients who are on Social Security, SSI, CalWORks, or maybe they're just not working. If that's the case, your AGI is zero because you don't have any taxable income. And so in those cases, I have clients whose income-driven repayment plan amount is $0 a month because they don't earn anything above 150% of the poverty level. But even that $0 is considered a full payment because under the IDR formula, that's what they're supposed to pay. And that's why that eventual forgiveness is really important, because if you're not paying anything on your student loans with the way that interest accrues, your balance is just going to keep increasing. But there is, like I said, that light at the end of the tunnel where the department has input this kind of safeguard for the most low income folks. If they're not able, if they've been on income driven, but under that formula, they've been found to only be required to pay $0 or very little. They're, they did what they were supposed to do. They paid according to their income, but the loan balance is still not paid off in 20 years. Well, they'll forgive it because, there should be some kind of relief at the end if you've been paying according to your income for 20 years. Oh, okay. Great. Just one thing to add, if your income lowers at any time, you can always tell your servicer. So say I did my March 2019 plan, I entered into it, and then unfortunately I lose my job in August. So I can't make those payments anymore, or I can't afford them, so I can tell my servicer and update it and get that lowered. If you are an IDR and you still cannot afford your payments because of some immediate situation, or maybe there was a medical emergency or whatnot, then I recommend looking into these options, forbearance or deferment. The problem is borrowers will call their servicer because they don't know about IDR, and they'll say, I can't afford this monthly payment. Say Tanya called her servicer and they said, okay, well, I can't afford $444 a month. What are my options? The servicer, because it's honestly, unfortunately, easier just to put people on forbearance, they'll say, okay, well, you can pause your payments for 12 months. You do it over the phone. It can take like 5 minutes. And so a lot of people get pushed into these forbearances. But the problem with this is it's limited in number. So later, if you actually really need to be on a forbearance, you may have used up all your options. Or maybe if you were properly assessed for IDR, you would have had an affordable payment. So I'm really glad people are on this call today so that they know what their options are. Sometimes forbearance is a good option for you, and that's totally fine. But it's good to know that income-driven repayment is available. If you are on forbearance, that time you're on forbearance doesn't count towards your eventual forgiveness like being on IDR does. So it's important to be aware of those options. Deferment is another way to pause payments, but you do have to apply for it. There are 2 options. The only reason I would really say to do deferment is if you have subsidized loans. Subsidized basically means that the government will subsidize or pay for the interest while you're on deferment. That's really needs-based. It's going to be dependent on your FAFSA, how much subsidized loans you qualify for. All Grad Plus loans, just as a note, are going to be unsubsidized. But if you do end up, if you do need to, you can look into that. Federal student loan defaults. Another reason it's really important to make sure you're on an affordable repayment plan is because you do not want to default on your federal student loans. I mentioned this before. It's a federal debt, and so you want to make sure that you are on top of your payments, because if you are not, unfortunately, the government has really strong collection powers. Unlike other types of debt, though, federal student loans are really unique. You don't fall into default until 270 days of non-payment. So that's 9 months of not paying your loans. So if you add that 9 months to the 6 months of grace period after you graduate, that's 15 months, over a year of after graduating, and maybe no one even comes after you for the loan. No one even contacts you. So it gets it's really easy for student loans to get kind of pushed to the side in terms of like the hierarchy of all the other, expenses that we have in our lives. But if you do default, these are some of the serious consequences that can happen. The government can garnish your wages while you're in default. They can offset any Social Security benefits. I see this a lot with my older clients who may have loans from like 30, 40 years ago, and now they're retired and they're getting their Social Security retirement offset. They can seize your tax refund. This is another big, a lot of clients come in after their entire tax refunds have been taken, because that's a big, it's a big chunk of money that they are really relying on. But it's a federal debt, and so your federal taxes can be offset to collect on it. Also, you're going to be likely reported to debt collection agencies. It's going to affect your credit. And once you're in default, you can't apply for any of those income-driven repayment plans that I was talking about. You have to get out of default first. And then you can't also get additional financial aid. If you were thinking maybe, I just need to just go back to school and get some training so that I can find a better job to pay off my loans. Unfortunately, you won't be eligible for federal financial aid if you are in default. There are two ways to get out of default, though, so I'm just going to briefly talk about it. I still think if you are in default, it's best to talk to, an attorney or a counselor to try to figure out which option is best for you, because each option can only be used once. One is called consolidation. What it basically means is it will consolidate all of your defaulted loans by paying it off and creating a new one. So say I had 4 loans that were all in default, and each loan was $1,000. Consolidation means I'm going to create a new loan for $4,000, and it'll pay off all those defaulted loans, and I have this brand new loan that has a balance that's the sum of all my defaulted loans. So now that my loans have been paid off, the defaulted ones, and I have this new one, I can apply for income-driven repayment on that new loan balance. The second option is rehabilitation. And it's kind of like, basically, it takes 9 months of non-payment to fall into default. Rehabilitation is you're trying to like show the department that I'm going to make efforts to pay. So you have to make payments for 9 months to get your loans out of default. If you compare the two, consolidation is much faster. The main reason people do rehabilitation is, one, it's slightly better for your credit. It removes the default notation on your credit report. And also, if you are subject to wage garnishment, you can only rehabilitate out of default. And the minimum payment for rehabilitation is $5 a month. I just really want to flag this. Student debt is very confusing. It can be kind of overwhelming because especially just, it's all of the different servicers, the different entities that are out there. And so there are, unfortunately, a lot of predatory companies that are, that advertise services that they claim will help students, but it actually, they're just charging for services that are free. So any company, especially with these types of debt relief companies that assure loan forgiveness or a reduction in your payments, just be very careful about those. You shouldn't have to pay anyone to help you with your student loans. The Department of Education already pays millions of dollars to these servicers that they contract with to do that very work. There are a lot of great resources out there. And if you have general questions, please feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to point you in the right direction. You shouldn't have to pay for these services, basically. If you do find that you have been a victim of any type of this student debt relief fraud or just overall debt relief fraud, it's really important for borrowers and consumers to file complaints, because there are agencies that are there to help enforce the law and to make sure that these types of predatory or scam businesses, don't continue doing, that kind of harm to other people. And so the California Attorney General's office and the FTC. I recommend filing complaints if you believe you're a victim of fraud. And there's also the CFPB for private student loans and an ombudsman for federal student loans. I believe that's the end. Okay, just briefly about what legal services we provide. So as I mentioned, I work at the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, and we have free legal services if you are eligible. My work is all on student loans, and actually a big chunk of the clients that I work with have been defrauded by for-profit schools. Luckily, with like organizations like Operation Jumpstart and other great ones in LA and in Southern California, I think young students have a lot of good resources and to help them find affordable quality education. But at the same time, if you personally have been or know of folks who have been defrauded by for-profits, it might be helpful for them to contact our office to see if we can help them and see if we can get them, out of default or into income-driven repayment plans and whatnot. I'm not going to talk too much about this because I don't think this is that applicable to this group. But basically, if folks have been in very specific situations, they can get their federal loans canceled. But it has to be very specific. So closed school is when you were enrolled in a school and the school closed before you could complete. So it's a very specific situation. False certification, basically if you didn't have a high school diploma or GED before you enrolled in your school, but you got financial aid, the school's supposed to make sure that you pass a test to show you're going to benefit from higher education. And that's just a way to safeguard taxpayer money and make sure that federal student loan dollars aren't going to people who are not going to benefit. And so there are ways that schools have tried to skirt those requirements. Bankruptcy is an option for student loans, but it's very limited. Right now the standard's very, very high, and you basically have to show that you have no ability to ever repay your debt. And so it's almost like a disability showing. And with federal loans, there is total permanent disability discharge. And defense to repayment is the last one. If you believe you've been defrauded by your school, you can raise the school's misconduct as a defense to repaying your federal loans. Just to kind of wrap that up, all of these are specific to federal student loans. Private student loans that's going to be completely governed by your contract. So it is really important to have a copy of your contract with your private loan. Usually it's a bank to see what your options are. I'm gonna pass this. If you know of anyone or if you have been served with a lawsuit for debt collection, just in any situation, if you've been served with a lawsuit, please contact an attorney immediately. There are very strict timelines to respond. And if you do not respond after being properly served, you're basically conceding to the other side. They can win by what's called a default judgment. And so if you know someone who's been sued on a student loan, there are some resources here. I've included our foundation's information as well as Public Counsel, which is another organization in Los Angeles. And if anyone is closer to Orange County, there's Public Law Center's number as well. Okay, I think I saved some time at the end for questions. So if folks have questions, I'm available and happy to answer any of your questions. I don't know if I should stop the share.
No, well, now is anyone's time. If either of you do have any questions for Josephine, now would be the time. We are going to.
And I'm happy to share my email as well, Javante, and you can share the slides with anyone who isn't able to join today's call. Okay. So if you do have questions, feel free to email me. I'm happy to try to, like I said, direct you in the right way. And yeah, best of luck with your schooling, and hopefully this was helpful. gave you some practical information to navigate kind of the crazy world of student loans.
I know the information that you gave was certainly some of it was certainly applicable to me. So I'm gonna definitely utilize some of that when I go home tonight.
Good.
Hopefully, hopefully the students can do the same.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for organizing, Javante, and thank you for those who joined today's webinar. And hopefully we get to do this again soon. And yeah, let me know if there's any questions, and happy to do any follow-up if needed.
Great. We appreciate your time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you from me. Thank you from the students. Thank you from all of us here at OJS. And you have a wonderful rest of your Monday.
Okay. You too. Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye.
And then for those of you still here, I will be sending out the survey after this, as well as the recording of the webinar, and the winner of the raffle is gonna be Mead. I got that pulled up over here. It was just the two of y'all. Mead's the lucky winner this go about. So I'll get all that information sent over to you guys in an email, as well as I'll let Maria know to contact you, Mead. And thank you guys for coming. Becca, you're the best. Mead, you too, brother. Keep on rocking. Y'all have a wonderful rest of y'all Monday as well. And I hope this quarter, semester, whatever it is for you guys, it's going fantastic. All right, now, y'all. Till next time.